The first thing I noticed about the photograph was that someone had carefully cut me out of it. My parents were smiling. My younger brother stood between them with Mickey Mouse waving in the background. But where I should have been, there was only a rough white outline. I couldn't breathe. The faded picture slipped from my fingers onto the attorney's desk while the smell of old paper filled the quiet room. Rain drummed softly against the windows, and the ceiling fan clicked overhead as if nothing unusual had happened. My Aunt Ruth had been gone only 3 days, yet somehow she had left me standing in front of a mystery that reached back nearly 30 years. The attorney never rushed me. He simply slid a weathered wooden box a little closer and said, "Your aunt believed the truth should arrive with proof." I looked inside. There were 8 more vacation photographs. Different places, different summers, Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, the Gulf Coast. Every picture showed my parents and my younger brother smiling together. Every picture was missing me. My father had always told me we couldn't afford family vacations. Every June before sunrise, they packed my little suitcase, drove me to Aunt Ruth's farmhouse in rural Tennessee, kissed my forehead, and promised I'd have more fun there anyway. I believed them because I was a little girl, and little girls trust the people who tuck them into bed. Looking back, those summers were peaceful. I gathered eggs before breakfast, helped Aunt Ruth water tomatoes, listened to cicadas as evening settled over the fields, and drank sweet tea while we sat on the worn porch swing, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. She never criticized my parents. She never explained why I always arrived alone. Yet one memory suddenly refused to leave me. Every August, after my parents' station wagon disappeared down the gravel road, Aunt Ruth stood silently behind the screen door with tears she thought I couldn't see. At the time, I believed she simply missed me. Now I wondered if she was mourning something neither of us could change. Beneath the photographs lay neatly labeled calendars, postcards, hotel receipts, and one sealed envelope placed carefully on top of everything else. Across the front, in Aunt Ruth's steady handwriting, were 8 words that turned my entire childhood upside down. Before you blame them, learn what they agreed to first. I read those 8 words over and over before I found the courage to open the envelope. Part of me wanted to blame my parents for every empty summer. But Aunt Ruth had never wasted words. If she believed there was something I didn't know, I owed it to her to keep reading. The attorney quietly stepped into the hallway, leaving me alone with the wooden box, the steady rain against the windows, and the old coffee maker humming somewhere down the hall. The letter inside began with a sentence that stopped me cold. "Sarah, your parents did send you away every summer, but not for the reason you think." My eyes searched the page for an explanation, but Aunt Ruth gave me something else instead. She described the first summer I arrived at her farmhouse, clutching a stuffed rabbit and asking every evening when my family would come back. She wrote that I cried for nearly a week before pretending. I enjoyed staying there because I didn't want anyone to worry about me. By the 3rd summer, I had stopped asking questions altogether. That quiet change, she said, broke her heart more than anything else she ever witnessed. I lowered the letter and remembered standing beside the old mailbox every afternoon, hoping for a postcard with my name on it. One always arrived, but every single one was addressed only to Aunt Ruth. She let me read them anyway, smiling as though everything was perfectly normal. I never noticed what she noticed. My name wasn't missing by accident. She had saved every postcard, every envelope, every grocery receipt from the weeks I stayed with her, and calendars marked with careful blue circles around each visit. At first glance, they looked like keepsakes. Looking closer, they formed a timeline too precise to be sentimental. Aunt Ruth wasn't preserving memories. She was preserving evidence. Then I reached the final page of her letter. Her handwriting became smaller, almost hesitant. "Your father always claimed he was protecting his family." I wanted to believe him. Then one afternoon, I watched a man from the local bank hand him an envelope before they left for another vacation, taped. Beneath those words was a faded bank deposit receipt dated the same day as one of the photographs. My father said we could never afford those trips, so why was someone paying him before every single one? I turned the bank deposit receipt over, hoping it would explain itself. It didn't. It showed only a date, an amount, and the initials of the local bank. My father had always blamed money for those missing summers. Now money seemed to be the one thing he never lacked when vacation season arrived. The attorney returned carrying a thin file folder and quietly placed it beside the wooden box. "Your aunt asked me not to show you this until you found the receipt yourself," he said. Inside were certified bank records, copies of canceled checks, and a notarized statement signed by Aunt Ruth nearly 25 years earlier. The deposits hadn't come from a loan or a customer. They came from a trust managed on behalf of my grandparents. I stared at the account number, recognizing my grandfather's initials from old birthday cards he used to send. Every deposit arrived just days before another family vacation. Every payment matched another summer I spent on the farm. I thought I finally understood the truth. My grandparents had paid my parents to leave me behind. Then everything changed again. Folded inside the file was a handwritten letter from Aunt Ruth that began, "If you've reached this page, you've probably blamed your grandparents. Don't do that yet." My heart sank. She explained that my grandparents had never asked for me to be excluded. They had invited the whole family every year. The person who insisted I stay behind was my father. He told them I preferred spending summers on the farm and that forcing me to travel would only make me miserable. They believed him because they trusted their own son. Aunt Ruth had discovered the lie only after overhearing a private conversation years later, but by then the false story had become the truth everyone accepted. My mother knew what was happening, yet she stayed silent because she believed challenging my father would destroy what little peace remained in our home. I lowered the letter, unable to reconcile the father I remembered with the man described on those pages. Just then, another envelope slipped from the bottom of the folder. Across the front, in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words that froze me in place. To Sarah, if she ever learns. My grandfather's handwriting was steady, even after all those years. I unfolded the letter slowly, half expecting another surprise that would undo everything I thought I had finally understood. Instead, I found something far more difficult to read. "Sarah," it began, "if this letter has reached you, then your Aunt Ruth kept the promise I asked of her. I pray she never had to use it." I stopped for a moment, letting those words settle. My grandfather admitted that he had believed my father's explanation from the very beginning. He truly thought I loved spending my summers on the farm and that forcing me to travel would make me unhappy. "I asked more than once why you never wrote to thank us for the gifts we sent," he wrote. "Your father always smiled and said you were shy. I had never received those gifts." The letter ended with an apology from a man who had died, believing he had treated both grandchildren fairly. I quietly folded it and reached for the last folder in the box. Inside were copies of shipping receipts, returned packages, birthday cards addressed to me that had never reached my hands, and notes from Aunt Ruth, documenting the day each one arrived at her house after being redirected from my parents' address. She hadn't simply protected memories. She had preserved proof that someone had carefully controlled what I knew and what I never would. The attorney finally spoke after nearly an hour of silence. "There's one more person your aunt wanted you to meet." He handed me the business card of Harold Benson, my grandfather's longtime accountant. The following afternoon, we met at a small diner, where the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air in pickup trucks, lined the parking lot. Harold opened a worn leather folder containing original trust records and correspondence. He confirmed that every payment, every vacation, and every explanation matched the documents Aunt Ruth had collected. Then he looked directly at me and quietly said, "Your aunt never wanted revenge. She wanted the truth, documented before everyone who remembered it was gone." I thanked him, hired an attorney, and asked only for the record to be corrected. A mediation date was scheduled 3 weeks later. As I walked out of the courthouse with the wooden box tucked beneath my arm, I realized I wasn't afraid of seeing my parents again. I was afraid of hearing what they would finally admit when they could no longer hide behind the lie. 3 weeks later, I walked into the county courthouse carrying the same weathered wooden box Aunt Ruth had protected for so many years. I wasn't there to embarrass my parents or take revenge. I was there because the truth deserved a place where no one could change it again. The mediation room was quiet except for the soft rustle of papers and the ticking of an old wall clock. My attorney arranged the photographs, calendars, trust records, bank deposits, returned birthday packages, and Aunt Ruth's letters in the exact order they had happened. Piece by piece, 30 years of family stories gave way to documented facts. My father looked at every page without interrupting. For the first time in my life, he had no explanation that matched the evidence. When the mediator asked whether the records were accurate, he lowered his eyes and answered with one word, "Yes." The silence that followed said more than any argument ever could. My mother quietly admitted she had known the truth for years. She said she convinced herself that protecting our home was worth sacrificing one child's happiness. I kept waiting for next summer, she whispered. Then there were no summers left. She didn't ask me to forgive her, and I respected that. My younger brother sat motionless as he read my grandfather's letter. When he finally looked at me, his voice trembled. I thought you wanted to stay with Aunt Ruth. That's all I was ever told. I believed him. He had been raised inside the same lie that had shaped my childhood. The agreement reached that afternoon corrected the estate records, preserved Aunt Ruth's evidence with the county file, and formally acknowledged the deception that had excluded me from years of family life. No one was dragged away in handcuffs. No judge delivered a dramatic speech. Life simply moved forward with the truth where the lie had once been. Over the months that followed, neighbors, church friends, and relatives slowly stopped repeating the old story because the documents spoke more clearly than rumors ever could. My father lost something no court could restore: the quiet trust people had placed in his word. Before leaving Tennessee, I visited Aunt Ruth's porch one final time. The evening breeze stirred the porch. Swinging cicadas filled the fields with their familiar song. I rested the wooden box beside me and smiled through quiet tears, knowing she had protected far more than papers. The greatest inheritance isn't property. It is the courage to leave the truth behind.